Hello friends, I am Carly, and today I shall be Beetlejuice, I am going to murder you. Today I'm going to be critiquing the article titled "The First Observation on the Mating Behavior of the Endangered Scalloped Hammerhead Shark in the Tropical Eastern Pacific," which is quite the mouthful. And first of all, I apologize because I don't have a stand for this phone, so I'm just gonna hold it with my hand. Also, I did at one point have my assistant here, Beetlejuice. He was helping me critique this article, but he clearly has better things to do, so we'll move on without him. So the main point of this paper, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Okay, the main point of this paper is to analyze footage captured of the very first ever scalloped hammerhead shark mating event. And that's pretty cool, I thought. But scalloped hammerhead sharks in general are pretty understudied. I just did a case study on them, and I had a lot of trouble finding reliable information about their abundance, their reproduction, amongst other things, which is pretty concerning because they're listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List and the U.S. Endangered Species List. And they're highly threatened by overfishing and like the fin trade market. So I'm wondering how, no management plan exists for this species yet, and I'm wondering how they're going to form a management or conservation plan in light of so little information being available about this species. So that's kind of a concern. Overall, this paper is highly readable, like it's pretty easy to read. And I think that the information, I am going to kill you. Beetlejuice Jennings. I've literally tried to record this like 5 times now without him causing havoc in the background, and it's just not gonna work out. So we're gonna move on. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna charge through this. So I guess we'll start with the positives first. I think the information in this study is really valuable because like I said before, they're understudied, and any information provided about this species is valuable to form management plans, and understanding their reproduction especially is important in order to form conservation plans to protect them. So, and also it's readable, like I said. So those are some positives, and then we'll go to the abstract. So the abstract is a fairly good skeleton of the paper. It highlights the important points. But there were some relevant points throughout the paper that like in some sections they focused on major points that were not mentioned in the abstract. So I feel like they should have maybe mentioned it in the abstract at least. And then another thing they say in the abstract is that this study is going to highlight the difficulty in observing mating behavior because it occurs in deeper waters, but they don't touch on that point again after it's mentioned in the abstract. And I can understand and infer why it would be difficult, because I just did a case study on this species, so I know that they have like a huge like worldwide distribution, and they hang out on continental shelves in deeper waters, and the chances of you coming across an actual mating event is slim. But for someone who like doesn't know anything about scalloped hammerheads and is just reading this paper for funsies, might not understand that. So I feel like that point deserves further explanation, especially if you're going to include it in the abstract. So there was that, and then the introduction, the purpose is clearly stated, the overarching purpose, I should say, the fact that they're providing evidence and information about their mating behavior, the first ever evidence of it, which will contribute to the overall knowledge about this species and help with management plans and so on. But there's no hypothesis stated. The only time they actually state a hypothesis is at the very end in the discussion, and it's a hypothesis over something that wasn't even mentioned in the abstract or in the introduction. They hypothesize about how their ontogeny occurs throughout the months of like March and July, I think it was. I could be wrong on that. On March and July. But in the introduction, they don't even talk about ontogeny. They focus solely on seasonal aggregating behavior. Beetlejuice, I'm gonna have to kick you out. Oh my god, oh my god. Do you hear him just annihilating things in the background? Okay, we're gonna get through this. Okay, so they don't mention ontogeny in the introduction at all. They talk about seasonal aggregating behavior, and they talk about the various hypotheses that have been proposed in the past over why this behavior occurs, but nobody really knows why they aggregate to these places during this time of year. But the authors don't really offer a hypothesis of their own as to why this information is relevant to the study overall. They go from explaining the seasonal aggregating behavior to the different hypotheses of why the seasonal aggregating behavior occurs, to all of a sudden saying, oh yeah, but shark reproduction, hammerhead shark reproduction is, scalloped hammerhead shark reproduction is not well understood, so here you go. I feel like that doesn't flow very well. It's kind of disjunct and doesn't really emphasize the point that maybe they're trying to make. So there's that. And then there's a lot of information talked about in the discussion that is not even mentioned in the introduction. I think I might have already said that, about ontogeny and other things. So it just seems, I don't know, I'm just not a fan of the flow of this paper. It seems very sporadic, I guess you could say. And then the materials and methods, there was no section actually titled materials and methods. There was, it went from abstract to introduction to observations to discussion. So the materials and methods and results were like smashed together in the observations. And for materials and methods, I mean, I can understand why it would be smashed together, because it's literally based on one video, one observation, so there's not much to like elaborate on there. But I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that. There is also some, sorry, my cat keeps destroying things in the background, and I'm trying not to go look because I'm afraid of what is broken now. So there could have been things mentioned as far as materials and methods go that were not mentioned at all, such as what type of camera was used to do the recordings. Like, that could lend credence to the quality of the footage and whether the observations were accurate. For instance, like, if you have a crappy camera, like, how are we to know as the readers that what you observed was accurate? Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean. And then also, they don't state the distance from which the mating event was recorded. I feel like that's a big problem because Beetlejuice? No, you're done. You're done. Nope. Stop it. Oh my God. 4 times I've recorded this, Beetle. 4 times. Give me a second. Okay, so it doesn't state the distance from which the mating event was recorded. I feel like there's a big difference between recording something from 5 feet and recording something from 5 yards. If you're making observations from closer to the source, like, I feel like they'd be more accurate and you can tell more what's going on as compared to recording something from 5 yards. So how am I to know that these observations were accurate if we don't know the distance from which they were recorded? And then they don't explain how it was recorded. Like, was it recorded from the boat? Was it recorded by a diver? No one knows. I don't know. So that's kind of an important thing to mention, I would think. And then for the results, like I said before, the materials and methods are coupled with the results in the section titled Observations. There's some discussion included in the results that I feel like belong in the discussion. For example, they talk about this different densitied substance being secreted from the female. And then in the results, they say, oh, which is probably sperm. But then in the discussion, when they mention this different densitied substance, they don't say that they think it was sperm. So the reader's supposed to remember that at one point in the results, they said, oh, this could be sperm. But then if you're just reading the discussion and solely the discussion, you have no idea what this different density substance is. It's just a little confusing. And then there's some words that need defining, like cephalofoil and isthmus. I feel like understanding these terms plays a part in understanding the sequence of events that are happening. And there's also some awkward wording when explaining the sequence of events. For example, it says that the female hit the bottom first with her cephalofoil, and this caused her to flip upside down. But then right after that, it says that she was in an upside down position until they both hit the bottom. So how did she end up in an upside down position by colliding with the bottom if they hadn't reached the bottom yet? That wording just confused me a little bit. So the figures. I had a few issues with the figures. So the first figure is basically like a drawing or a cartoon depiction of the video footage. I feel like they could have included maybe screenshots of the actual video footage instead of drawings. Because like I said, if we're to trust that this video footage was accurate enough to draw these conclusions, they should be clear and accurate enough to put screenshots in the study. Does that make sense? I don't know. I just didn't like that there weren't any actual images in the picture, or in the study. And then on top of that, there's 6 photos, and the authors separated the sequence of events in their mating thing. While they were mating, they separated it into 6 sequence of events, like pre-copulatory biting, free falling, and then post-copulatory following. But you're supposed to assume, I guess, as the reader, that each image depicts each step in the sequence of events, but then it doesn't label each image as being this specific event. So they could have at least done that, because without labeling it, it's difficult to tell what's going on in each image or what step in the sequence of events that it is. And they also don't tell you which one is male and which one is female in the images. Just by looking at it, you can kind of tell which one male and which one is female, but they could have at least included that, I feel like. And then there's figure 2. So figure 2 is you're reading the article, and all of a sudden you come across this figure of scalloped hammerhead shark ontogeny. And like I said before, ontogeny isn't mentioned anywhere else in the paper. And then all of a sudden there's this picture, and it's kind of confusing. It's like, how is this relevant to the paper? And then, like, in the very towards the very end of the discussion, they finally start talking about ontogeny. So I feel like they could have at least moved the figure to a more reasonable spot, so that you're like, oh, okay, that's what that is, right next to where it's mentioned in the article. And then the discussion. So there's some things that are explained very, like, scattered and unclear. For example, they say that their video evidence supports the sperm propulsion theory, but then they don't. Just the way that they explained it, I had to read that paragraph like 3 or 4 times to actually understand what the sperm propulsion theory was. And that's just me, but I feel like there could have at least been a better way of explaining it. And then they spend a lot of time talking about other species of sharks, like reef sharks and their reef shark reproductive morphology and mating behavior, and how that relates to the scalloped hammerhead in one way or another. But I feel like they spend a little too much time talking about other species when the literal focus of the paper is supposed to be the scalloped hammerhead. What? I'm gonna murder him. I'm gonna murder him. So, also one thing that was confusing was that the authors suggest that the video evidence supports the theory that schooling behavior does not play a role in reproduction, but later states that reproductive pairing, where the male chooses the female and they couple up and go off and do their thing, that occurs in groups. So I don't know. I feel like that would say that schooling behavior does have a role in reproduction. And on top of that, their main hypothesis, it's hard to tell what their main hypothesis is, to be honest, but they mention this hypothesis in the second to last sentence. The first time they ever mention a hypothesis, in the second to last sentence of the discussion, end of the whole article, is that they hypothesize that their mating occurs at a particular time of year. And this coincides with their aggregating behavior. So now it's starting to become clear why they were talking so much about aggregating behavior in the introduction, but I mean, they could have at least mentioned that their hypothesis in the introduction, but they didn't. And then the very last sentence talks about the importance of understanding their ontogeny. And arguably the last sentence is the most important is one of the most important, because if you're trying to drive a point home, it's the last thing that's left in the reader's mind, and it's like a take-home point. So for some reason they want the author's take-home point is ontogeny is important to understand. If it's that important of a point, it wasn't mentioned in the abstract or the introduction, and it was mentioned kind of like as a tack-on, it feels like. So, I don't know. I just feel like the flow wasn't very flowy, and it was disjunct, and also in regards to schooling behavior, if their main point is that their ontogeny overlaps with this aggregating behavior, like their reproductive season occurs at the same time that this aggregating behavior occurs, then I would take from that schooling behavior does have a role in reproduction, but then, like I said before, they state that our findings contradict the theory that schooling behavior has a role in reproduction. So they're saying it doesn't have a role in reproduction, but what I got from their main hypothesis and various other things mentioned throughout the paper was that it does play a role in reproduction. So that's something I was confused about. And then throughout the paper, there are some things that aren't explained. For example, they mentioned that reef sharks, again with the mentioning other species, they mentioned that reef sharks, their mating behavior was recorded, and it shows that males, like multiple males, will surround a female, but scalloped hammerheads, there's one male to one female. Again, this is based on one single observation, but they mention that, because we observed one male to one female for scalloped hammerheads, it supports the hypothesis by Eberhard, or however you pronounce this man's name, or woman's name, this person's name. But they don't explain the hypothesis at all. So that's another thing I had a problem with. And then I'm losing I'm going to lose it. Losing it, Beetlejuice. Losing it. So, overall, I thought the information in the paper was a bit disorganized. There's some discussion included in the results that belong in the discussion. The authors shift focus multiple times. Like I said, with the ontogeny being like the main point in the discussion, and then the aggregating behavior being the main point in the introduction, and how those two connect is a little bit difficult to infer, and I feel like the reader shouldn't have to infer. It should be better explained by the authors. Also, the study can't be duplicated, really. If this behavior is like uniform for the entire species, then obviously you could go out and record the same behavior, but because this is one observation, I don't know about that. I'm just gonna say no. I'm gonna say no for that one. Also, a single observation does not seem sufficient to support some of the author's conclusions. There are sentences worded awkwardly, and then I couldn't find many things wrong with the literature cited, but Klimley is cited 4 times. They do have lots of references, but Klimley cited 4 times, and I don't know. I don't know if that is pushing it or not, but it seems like 4 times is a little excessive, maybe. So, overall, as a peer reviewer, I would suggest revising the critiques that I just mentioned before publication. I thought the paper was pretty interesting despite all the bad things I just said about it. But I do think it's valuable because there's so little known about this species, and they are in danger. So whatever evidence is out there, whatever information we can obtain about this species is valuable. So there we go. That's it. I think I'm done. I'm gonna go murder my cat now. Okay, goodbye.